But one of our complaints is we who actually work in the culture, and I think everyone up here in their own right works in the culture, is that quite often it seems like people on our side of the political spectrum have never read a book that wasn't nonfiction and have never watched a movie that wasn't a documentary. I know it's not true. At night, I know that, Louis Gohmert goes home and watches Real Housewives of New Jersey just like everyone else, and then pretends that he doesn't, just like everyone else. But unfortunately, as a movement, we seem completely unconcerned with the culture. Or as someone said in the last panel when referring to our use of social media, it's almost as though we think that social media is a tool where you need to go over and build up this aspect, instead of being a reflection, which is what the culture actually is. The culture is a reflection of where we are as a people. Pop culture is a reflection of what's going on in the greater culture. And so it's not so much that we need to learn how to engage the culture, it's that we have to actually participate in the culture. We have to organically become a part of the culture, let the culture inform us. And I think that it's worth noting that the last time we ran a candidate who not only utilized the culture, but came directly out of the culture, he won 49 out of 50 states. Ronald Reagan was not fundamentally a politician. He was fundamentally a member of the pop culture. He spoke to the American people in the language that they understood, which is the language of the pop culture. When you often hear Republicans talk about Mitt Romney and Barack Obama in 2012, they would say things like, Barack Obama doesn't speak the language of the American people. I mean, when he speaks about the Constitution, he always bastardizes it and cheapens it and uses it out of context. When he speaks of the founders, he doesn't speak of them reverently. But that's not the language of the American people. I mean, when you get together with your friends over a game of golf, you don't actually quote the founders very often. And with the exception of Ben Shapiro, none of us here has actually memorized the Constitution. The language of the American people is The Simpsons, and the language of the American people is American Idol. The language of the American people is pop culture. We drive around in our cars, most of us actually listening to music radio, not talk radio. And that's why, until we come to understand and appreciate what's going on in the culture, we don't really understand why Barack Obama won. The reason Barack Obama won is because the culture has been prepping the battle space for his ascendancy for the last 40 years. I know it's popular to say that Americans are not a racist people, and certainly politically we're the least racist people functioning in the world today, but there's a little bit of racism left in the culture, and it's been cultivated in such a way that it actually favors the ascendancy of a Barack Obama instead of penalizing the ascendancy of a Barack Obama. And I think that that's hopefully something that we can get into a little bit today as we engage in this conversation about taking back the culture. So thank you guys for being here with us. I think to get it started, if we could just go down the panel and everyone tell us a little bit about yourselves and your thoughts, and then we'll kind of turn it into a bit more of a conversation, which I'll moderate, and then in the end we'll take questions for anyone who'd like to engage with us. Thank you. Ben.
Okay, I guess we'll start at the far end. In order to kind of understand the impact that the culture has on the debate, I think it's important to understand that people don't even understand politics in terms of pure policy. People understand politics in terms of a moral narrative that Hollywood is best geared toward playing out. That's why if you talk to most people who actually voted in the 2012 election, most people were not closely following the issues of policy that Romney and Obama were laying out. Instead, what they were following was the moral narrative. And the moral narrative that was being played out was something like this from Barack Obama's side. Mitt Romney is a horrible person. Mitt Romney is the kind of person who puts dogs on tops of cars. Mitt Romney is the sort of guy who wants to put y'all back in chains. Mitt Romney fires folks specifically so that their wives lose health insurance and die of cancer 6 years later. That's who Mitt Romney is. Mitt Romney is the black hat in this moral universe. Mitt Romney was busy talking policy. He was saying Barack Obama's a bad president, but fundamentally he's a good guy. He's just kind of a bad president. Obama was speaking the language of Hollywood. Mitt Romney was speaking the language of talk radio. And the problem is that most Americans, on a fundamental level, understand moral narrative. And that's what Hollywood truly is about. And that's where the right really goes wrong. The right is shy about casting politics in terms of values. They're shy about casting politics in terms of morality. And so I think there are two problems when we talk about the culture. The first is the problem of the culture completely lacking any semblance of balance, the culture being completely leftist. That's nothing new. The culture has been like this really since the late 60s in television, and really since before that in the movie industry. But the 60s was really the turning point. If you look at the culture, it's no shock that it's like this. Everybody thinks the same way. It's an absolute echo chamber. When I wrote a book called Primetime Propaganda, which was about Hollywood, and I went undercover with all the folks in Hollywood, I wore a Harvard law cap. My last name is Shapiro. I'm from Los Angeles. That means there's a 99% shot I'm a liberal, so they assumed I was a liberal. And they spoke honestly with me about what Hollywood does, and people freely admitted that they were trying to put social messaging into what they were doing. They were trying to push a social justice agenda. That's one problem. I think that there's a second separate problem that I think pretty much everybody on the panel would agree with, and that is that the Republican Party has refused to learn the lessons of Hollywood. So in the same way that Hollywood doesn't take any of the politics of the right seriously, the right refuses to take any of the narrative of Hollywood seriously. And I think there's that's almost the reason why Hollywood is so replete with liberals, because a good conservative doesn't go into Hollywood. A good conservative doesn't get involved in the culture. A good conservative sits at home and listens to Rush Limbaugh and then goes and writes white papers for the Heritage Foundation. And that's bound to be a loser, because the fact is that as great as the white papers are at the Heritage Foundation, they're going to get read by two people who are both staffers for Mitch McConnell, and they're never actually going to be seen by anybody outside of that particular space. If we want to start winning again, if conservatives want to be ascendant in the culture again, they have to make the case that our values are the right values, that the opposing values are actually evil and wrong and hurt people. And that's a Hollywood narrative that has to be drawn out not only in Hollywood, but that narrative has to be extended into the realm of politics itself. Thanks.
Let me pick up on some of the themes Ben just emphasized. Last year we had a similar panel, and I'll just start my brief comments with a point I made last year and then move on to new things. Coming from the old Marxist left, I always start with and I got this from my friend, the late Gene Genovese, a great conservative historian who used to be a Marxist, who called his book on Southern history The Southern Front. And he did that because he took a cue from the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who said that there's a battle for cultural hegemony, and we can't change politics unless we wage a war of position within the culture to change the culture before there can be any political change. And that's a great insight that conservatives have to learn from. We have to wage a war for the culture, for the whole way of life, for the assumptions, the values, the themes that are inherent in everybody's shares. And I think there's no doubt that up to the present time, I think it's beginning to change, the left has been winning. Let me give you a few examples. I just got an email from a friend of mine who's a conservative social studies educator who works in curriculum for high school and elementary school. And coming up in 2 weeks is the convention of something called it's the annual convention of the Social Studies Education Council. It's the major professional organization of people working on curriculum and teaching social studies. Its membership is largely made up, not college teachers, but high school and middle school teachers and some elementary school teachers. Who are the keynote speakers at the convention? Our old friends Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick, who are giving the keynote address on how to teach the history of the Cold War. They're reaching thousands of educators at a national convention. And I was on a one-man campaign virtually with some people joining in to fight against everything they said in various columns, the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, other venues, PJ Media. And they were exposed in terms of the lies they told, the misinformation they were giving. His documentary was on Showtime. Now it's been re-released. It's going to be shown on regular cable channels because the Showtime contract has passed. The DVDs are out. It's going to be used by college teachers and high school teachers throughout the country who are going to take 1 or 2 or 3 episodes and show them in their classes. You can't over-exaggerate the impact this has and how our kids are being educated. If you thought Howard Zinn was bad, Stone has celebrity and he makes movies. Why isn't there a conservative who can do an accurate history of the Cold War, knows how to make a film, and consult the conservative historians who will write a really truthful script to counter this? We don't have this. Years ago, PBS did a history of the Vietnam War, which was totally distorted. Now it's going to be magnified because next year, when you have a new anniversary of Vietnam, you're going to have Ken Burns' history of the Vietnam War, and I tell you in advance, it's going to be horrendous. And everybody loves Ken Burns. And that's going to be the history of the Vietnam War that Americans learn and see. Secondly, another example from Hollywood. I wrote about this in National Review Online a month ago, or a couple of weeks ago, actually. Bryan Cranston, coming out of Breaking Bad, is the hot actor in Hollywood. He deserves all the plaudits. He's a great actor, if any of you watch Breaking Bad. The first major project he's doing for Hollywood, already signed and starting to be filmed, is a movie called Trumbo about the communist screenwriter Dalton Trumbo. It's based on a 30-year-old book that is pure hagiography, that the author of which, Bruce Cook, totally bought Trumbo's lies and did it in terms of his own narrative. None of the truth is going to be in this movie because it's based on this book. Now, I think, from what I see, and Ben probably knows more about this, I don't know how successful the films are. The left is good at old-style agitprop, and often it fails. Robert Redford did a movie, a dreadful movie, about the Civil War that was really evidently about the Bush-Cheney terrorist policies. Totally flopped. It went right to video on demand and Netflix. I don't think it lasted a day or two in the theaters. Then he made the movie last year about the Weather Underground. Look at the film about this movie. He was on tons of talk shows, radio and TV. I finally saw the movie. Peter Collier wrote a great piece showing also its falsehoods. Peter wrote that in the Weekly Standard. Now, I don't know how the movie did. I suspect it did horribly. He tried to do it as a thriller, but the message was the following. All these leaders of the Weather Underground weren't terrorists, they weren't bomb throwers. They were morally conscious, good young people who just used unfortunate methods, which were understandable because the real terrorist and the real evildoer is the United States. So we have to excuse them even if we don't adopt their methods. And in the interviews I saw Redford give, this is what he thinks and this is what he agrees with. Now, they make films like that. It's agitprop. I think conservatives can make much better films. They don't have to emulate their style, which they can get funded, and they do these films. And I'll give one good example. The most underrated, and I think it does very well because it's always renewed, is the TV show with Tom Selleck, Blue Bloods, which is a great conservative television show. And look at the themes. One of my favorite episodes a year ago was about a black mayor black hustler in New York, a race hustler, clearly modeled on Al Sharpton, who was creating a phony incident in order to get support and inflame the people in the black ghetto. And my favorite line in that episode, when they confront the mayor, what you do is going to be disastrous, there's going to be riots, it's going to bring down New York, we have to stop him and placate him. And speaking about this character, who is a reverend, Tom Selleck's character says, oh, he's just trying to get his own show on MSNBC. Now, that makes the point. That's a great line. We have to have people writing things like that. Maybe Andrew can write one. And not do agitprop. You can bring out the themes culturally. The reason I love Blue Bloods, it's about a wonderful Irish Catholic nuclear family that always meets together for dinner on Sunday night. They have really solid family values. Politically, it's conservative without hammering home the theme. It gets into the politics of New York City so accurately. It's absolutely wonderful. People like it as entertainment, but the underlying message makes you think about it, not a ham-fisted way, which is the way a lot of the left stuff, because they're written by old leftists, is all agitprop. So I think there's opening for conservatives in Hollywood like Andrew and Ben to begin doing good things that they can get funded that will help change the whole culture slowly. We don't have to give up on Hollywood, and we don't have to give up on education. So those are the two areas. And I think education, we really got to do something about getting some conservatives concentrating on the liberal arts. We can't just leave it to the leftists. It's just too dangerous to let them get away with it. I'll stop now.
Drew? Time.
Jeremy's an old friend, or otherwise I'd have to have heard him. But I've been making a living writing novels and movies for 25 years. That's been really my only living. And I feel that the problem that conservatives have entering this field and supporting this field, which is even more important because we get no support, is that they don't understand that conservative art doesn't look like conservative life, okay? Conservatives have been picking on the arts since men wrote on walls, okay? Ovid, one of the formative poets of my life, was banished to an island the size of this table for writing pornography. The Vatican painted drapery on the nudes of Michelangelo. Ulysses and Lady Chatterley's lover had to go through court cases to keep from being banned as pornography, rock and roll, sex in the movies. Conservatives have opposed them all. As a result of this clever strategy, there are now no conservatives in the arts. I mean, the arts are so completely dominated by the left that they can now blacklist us, and even worse, they can ignore and give bad reviews to good pieces and good reviews to bad pieces that support their politics, which they do. Let me just make sure I say everything I have to say. Every week on Law and Order, they rewrite a political event that favored the right to favor the left. Yeah. The movies that have been coming out for the last 40 years have been rewriting history and politics to do the same thing. Argo won the Oscar, I think, last year, and good movie. It's a good movie. It rewrote the Iran hostage crisis as being America's fault, and it rewrote Jimmy Carter as a competent president and a fine statesman who brought everyone out safely. Shoot me dead, please, okay? Now, I just want to be clear about this. I live a very conservative life, all right? I've been a family man for, more than 30 years. It may be too much information, but my sex life basically consists of my wife and watching Game of Thrones. That's it. I live a life that could be a Hallmark movie. I don't watch Hallmark movies, and I stopped watching Blue Bloods after a while because I knew what they were going to say. I knew they were going to confirm my values. I knew they were going to confirm my ideas. I want to see Tosca. I want to see Macbeth. I want to see The Sopranos. I want to see people commit adultery. I want to see sex. I want to see violence. I want to see murder. Because that's what those are the great stories. Those are the great stories that tell what the internal life of man is like. That's what the arts are for. They are for communicating what it is like to be a human being. You cannot do that on the Hallmark Channel, okay? So conservative art is art that tells the truth, because conservatives are truth-based people. If the truth opposes conservatism, we change our minds, okay? What the left has done is they make good art that tells lies. And that's what we should be fighting. The right does not need, we do not need another pundit telling us about Miley Cyrus's backside. So help me, we do not need it. What we really do need, and we need it desperately, is we need think tanks, grants, awards, and more importantly than anything else, review venues that talk about the arts, that favor people who support the American ideal of individual liberty. I mean, right now, if my wife wants to hear about the new jazz artist or the great hot new television show or watch Bryan Cranston get interviewed or hear him get interviewed, she has to turn on NPR and get socialism with her culture. Where are we on this? We just are not supporting the artists who believe what we believe and who know what we know, and that's what we have to start doing.
Thanks, Drew, and True. I've been one of the rare people who's worked both in creating an enterprise that makes money. I went to law school with Laura Ingraham, and we had this idea, let's talk to a lot of Americans. So we sort of syndicated our own show, put it out there, spoke to a lot of people, and get this, we turned a profit. It's a crazy idea. And then I met the people at Salem, and that's Bill Bennett, Dennis Prager, Michael Medved, like my heroes, and now I oversee that operation, and get this, we turn a profit. It's a crazy idea again. And so I'm sort of a little tired of us on the right acting like we can't own the media too. Because we have two examples. We have talk radio, and it's fantastic. It preaches to the choir. And then we have Fox News. CNN had a 16-year head start, and Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch beat them in 2 years. 2 years, took them to match their audience. So if you would indulge me, because I'm not a public speaker like this, I'm the man behind the scenes who likes making stars or working with stars and making them better and getting them out. We've all talked together, that is, a lot of the big talk radio hosts, and we're preaching to the choir, but the question is who's getting the center? And so National Review asked me to write a quick column on this. This is why I was invited, so if you'll indulge me, it'll take about 4 minutes to read it, but I'll serve you all better by doing that. Because this is now an executive talking about what we can do as donors and funders to think about how we create more enterprises that tell stories and fund people like Andrew and Ben and get stories out into the public. And the title of the National Review piece, which went all over the place and got me invited here, is called A Deficit of Stories. And I wrote this during the government shutdown. How did it happen? How did we wake up one day to find ourselves cast as the bad guys for trying to save future generations from a lifetime of indebtedness? Why are we punished for pointing out that if we keep spending more money than we take in, we won't continue to be a great country? Why do Americans view Republicans more negatively than Democrats when it's Democrats who gave us Detroit and Democrats who might soon turn America into Detroit? Well, how did that happen? It's simple. We're losing the debate about our deficits and everything else because we have the biggest deficit of our own, a storytelling deficit. How did the left accumulate all of these important media conglomerates, then get them to sing from the same playbook and do the bidding of one political party at the expense of another? It's simple. The left takes the business of media ownership and storytelling seriously. We don't. That's ironic, given that we take ownership of every other business in the universe seriously, in every other walk of life. Serious people, if they want to dominate their field, own distribution pipelines. Ask the Koch brothers. Ask Walmart. They didn't complain about a lack of pipelines or a pipeline bias. They built them, and they made fortunes. The loyal soldiers of the left have turned their pipelines, their media pipelines, into political fortunes. They've reaped wins not only in politics, but in shaping how we Americans view ourselves in the world, what we think about risk-taking, work, private capital, family, even God. Those who tell the stories rule society, Plato said. Muriel Rukeyser said, the universe is made up of stories, not atoms. Stories are packed not with hard data, but with something far more powerful, emotional data. That's why we remember them and why they're so easily transported. Even through generations, stories stir our souls. If Plato were around today, he'd have added this caveat. Those who own the networks rule society. What an advantage ownership confers. Take the shutdown. From Jon Stewart to Wolf Blitzer, from ABC to CNBC, the story was the same. Extremist Republicans held the country hostage for their own political advantage, while a heroic President Obama held steadfast to principle, refusing to negotiate with domestic terrorists, us. The impact of this mass media advantage is incalculable. Indeed, it is so powerful that it creates an effect much like the Stockholm Syndrome. We conservatives begin to feel as if we're hostages and a beleaguered minority in our own country, though we're not. We begin to placate those who hold power, or we fall to arguing amongst ourselves. And soon our own internal family squabbles themselves become fodder for the media. When we vent, we become the very caricature of ourselves that the media created, the angry white old guy. That's the power of media ownership. A small group of people can have a profound impact on the culture. Indeed, it is a form of asymmetric warfare the left is fighting against our own country, and they're reaping huge benefits from their investments. So the question I ask this audience, where are our versions of these mass media platforms? We have a few. In '96, Ailes, with the help of Murdoch, launched Fox. It didn't take long for them to beat CNN. We have success in talk radio. I launched Laura Ingram's show in 2001. I run some very big shows on Salem. But we are not telling stories in these platforms. Mostly, we're just preaching to the choir. Not a bad thing, because choirs need to be fed. But why we don't own more distribution channels and content providers is beyond me. Do we believe we can reason our way to victory using our superior arguments to win back our country? If so, the factually inclined among us have forgotten two important facts. Most human beings get their information through stories, and most Americans don't like the smart guy in the room telling us what to think, even if that guy believes a lot of what we believe. Regrettably, we have too few people communicating our stories effectively, the story of free enterprise and the American character. We've developed a bench of PhDs, invested billions in think tanks, nothing when it comes to telling stories, making venues where we can share those stories. Imagine this, if we had our own NPR, for instance, an organization we love to mock, but get this, it reaches 35 million people a day. Fox reaches 2. And confess it, you've all listened to NPR. When you've had it with the claptrap and the screaming and yelling, you go there because they tell stories. Crazy Marxist loony stories, but nonetheless stories. If we had our own version of NPR, an organization we mock, we'd see storytellers coming out of the woodwork, guys like Andrew, because we'd have distribution. We'd see an army of pundits, just as the army of pundits came to Fox News, we'd have an army of storytellers coming to NPR. Indeed, the power of owning our own version, our own distribution outlet, would be all-encompassing, because the distributor has the power to shape content and train a generation of stars and storytellers. These stories could reach independents, new generation of listeners and viewers, because it wouldn't take much to turn our version of NPR into TV, podcast, apps, and live streams. So let's challenge our most generous donors to dream big and reverse engineer some of the left's most effective storytelling conglomerates. In the past two cycles of politics, GOP donors have donated billions of dollars to TV ads, and that's a giant donation. What do we have to show for that investment? Worse, those advertising dollars fill the coffers of the very media conglomerates we hate.
That's right.
We're funding the other team, we're funding the enemy, and we're the smart guys? Don Hewitt, the genius behind 60 Minutes, was asked why the show he created was so successful. He was on the Laura Ingraham show, and he said this in 2001. He said, "Tell me a story, one with a beginning, a middle, and an end." He added, "Stories have good guys and bad guys, conflict and resolution," what Andrew was talking about. In the liberal universe, the bad guys are corporations, millionaires, Christians, Israel, the US military, billionaires, the founding fathers, energy producers, and that's just a few. That's us. The good guys, journalists, trial lawyers, union leaders, Palestinians, and government agencies. And that's just a few. They're framing the moral universe with good guys and bad guys. And all we do is complain. We need our big donors, most of them big dreamers and builders themselves, to invest in a few good men and women who will construct a new distribution platform of storytelling tanks. Invest big. Let those people hire people who know what they're doing, who sound like America, who look like America, and who share America's values. Then watch the audience come, and revenue too. Watch us shape the cultural narrative for change. Let's stop complaining about our storytelling deficit and media bias. Please. It's time to construct our own. How hard could it be? Liberals did it.
But the one thing that everyone mentioned, and Lee so eloquently there, was the idea of story and the framing of the narrative in terms of good and evil. And that started with Ben and ended with Lee. And something that I've said for quite a while now is that the left understands that stories have villains. And while David has written his Go for the Heart tract, and Ben, you mentioned this too, about us taking a page out of that book and doing the same. When Mitt Romney says that Barack Obama is a good guy who's not a very effective administrator of the government, it would be like if Obi-Wan Kenobi had said to Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader is a pretty good guy, but he doesn't administer the Galactic Empire very well. If he had said that, we wouldn't go on the journey with Luke Skywalker after that. We'd be against, Luke Skywalker would seem like a terrorist for trying to kill all those nice people on the giant government space station at the end of the movie. And that's how we see Mitt Romney, right? In exit poll after exit poll after exit poll after exit poll, the American people agreed with Mitt Romney on every single question of policy. Not the majority of policy, all policy. But they didn't vote for him. You know why? He's evil. Hitler probably had some good ideas about how to build better roads and bridges, but we wouldn't vote for him because he's evil. And the American people don't want to see themselves as being aligned with evil. The American people don't get their news from Fox News. Lee, as you said, 2 million people watch it, 20 million people watch American Idol. The average American person under the age of 35 watches 1,500 hours of film and television every year. That's 40 hours a week. That's a full-time job. If you think about your kids who are under 18, they go to school for that same amount of time, meaning for 80 hours a week, they have 2 full-time jobs of being indoctrinated by the story of the left. I mean, does a good parent spend 15 minutes a day in meaningful conversation with their kid? I mean, does the most religious parent among us take their kids to church for 2 hours a week? We're never going to make any dent until we engage this concept of story. And so, Ben, since you started with the concept of story, I wondered if you'd expound on it a little bit. Tell us where you think what is the story of the right, and how can we tell it more effectively?
I mean, the story of the right is that the left is an obstacle to liberty. Period. The left is an obstacle to freedom. The left is an obstacle to a better life for everyone. The left is an obstacle to opportunity. The left is standing in between you and the future that you get to create for yourself. What's really ironic about all of this is that what has happened in Hollywood is the left actually, we're saying that we want to hijack the methods of the left. The truth is that the left hijacked the ideology of the right. Meaning the left, they're a bunch of moral relativists. They don't believe in the concepts of good and evil, except when they're telling stories. When they're telling stories, suddenly it becomes there is a good and there is an evil. And so they've hijacked kind of the moral tropes of the right, and they've leveraged them into the properties of the left, and that's what's so effective about it, because if they told a morally relativistic story all in shades of gray, it would be entertaining, but it wouldn't have the same moral impact, right? This is why Breaking Bad, I think, which is a story about shades of gray, is not something that has a tremendous leftist impact, whereas Avatar, which is a story about black and white, has tremendous moral impact for the people who are watching it. And I